So welcome to a new guide on this channel, and this occasion is working with MIDI on Studio One. Now some things like patterns and MIDI actions, I will cover them on a different video. Now everything on this guide is in chapters, so if you look at the description or the timeline, you can jump to a section or skip the ones you don't want. Now if you like what I do, if you like this guide, like and subscribe please, and if you have the money and you want to buy me a coffee, everything is on the description. So right from the start, we kind of need an instrument. In this case, I'm going to be using DCO 106 from Cherry Audio. This is a synthesizer, is an emulation of a Juno. So this is what I'm using. So the first thing we need to talk about is the basics, how we can add a clip so we can work with that clip. Now by default, the main thing that you should do is by going to right here, the timeline, and you can double click and this will create a clip for you. And by default, it's going to be a bar. Now in this case, I'm just going to select this and I'm going to delete it. And if you want to, you can bring your loop bar right here at the top. And now if you double click, it's going to create a clip of the size of the loop bar. So at the end, we can make it shorter, or we can, go right here and just, make it like this. In this case, I'm just going to make it one bar and I'm going to stand right here. And I'm just going to enable the loop for now. So once you create a MIDI clip like this, by double clicking, you can access the edit that you have right there at the bottom. Now, sometimes it's going to be really small, so you're going to need to move it up, or you can go all the way up just to, to see it on full mode, or you just can resize it to whatever you want to. Now, again, going to edit is going to close it, and going to edit back again is going to show you this. Still, if this is too small for you, you can go right here and detach it. Once you detach it, it's going to detach it from the bottom. You can pin it and maybe put it on a different screen. And also what you can do, you can go full size. It depends on, what you like. Maybe you like this. In this case, I'm just going to unpin it and go right here at the bottom, and I'm going to keep it right there. Now, remember, this is the edit view. So if you're standing on this clip, you're going to be watching the edit view of that clip, and you can close it by going to the edit right here at the bottom, or you just can open it up again. Now, still, sometimes the view is a little bit too small, so you can adjust everything right here. Now, you can go to the timeline right there, and you can scroll up, and you're going to be making it bigger or making it smaller. And I'm doing this with the scroll of my mouse. Also with the click, what you can do, you can just make it bigger, just make it smaller. Pretty simple, I believe. I don't need to tell you this. Now notice when we drag and we just make it smaller and we make it bigger, this timeline is not moving along with this one, right? We make this one super small and this one is not adjusting. So this is by default how it works. Now in the right side, right here, you have an option that it says synchronize editor to arrangement. Now, since we have a kind of a separate timeline right here, when you click on this one, it's going to synchronize this with this. So if I make this small, the other one is going to move, it's just going to follow. Right? So, that's an option that you might use if you want to, but we have all the things. Now, the piano roll right here, it's super small, and the timeline right here can be adjusted as well. So at the very bottom right here, if you go follow the mouse, right there at the bottom, you have the controls to kind of control all of this. And this works the same way this works. So for example, if I go right here, this is going to be the data zoom. This is just going to go and just make the piano smaller, or it's going to make it larger like that. Now, for example, if you have some notes right there and you cannot see them, I'm going to be going right there at the bottom, make it smaller. But if you go big, it's going to let you know the notes. So if you are wondering why you're not seeing the name of the notes right there, it's because of that. You just need to make it a little bit kind of a wider. Let me just adjust this, make it a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger. Now, sometimes when you scroll this, it's going to be a little bit too aggressive. So by holding Shift, you can go in small values. So this one will adjust it horizontally. Now, again, it works a little bit like this one. If you go right there and you do it very aggressively, it's just gonna go a little bit too crazy. Now you can do Shift and do it slowly, just like this, and it's gonna be a little bit more controllable. Now also when you zoom like this, this is kind of a follow whatever your cursor is. Right now, it's right at the beginning. So when we make it smaller or we make it bigger, it's just going to be adjusted to the position of your cursor. If I do something like this and I position right there, when I zoom, it's going to be zooming right on this spot. So this is important because maybe you have a kind of a big ass MIDI right here and you want to zoom it right there, and it's gonna, maybe your cursor is right there at the beginning and it's gonna zoom right there. Maybe you don't want that. You just need to position yourself whatever you want to be, zooming. So sometimes messing with the time zoom is just, not that fun. So what you can do when you're standing right here, you can do shift and you hold the shift and do the letter L, and it's going to zoom and adjust to whatever you have right here on the loop bar. Now, if I make this one really, I want to say really big, I'm just going to make it, wider. And I do the same thing right here, is going to adjust to that, right? So if you just want to loop your MIDI and zoom to your MIDI, to you only MIDI clip, shift L and done. And another thing that you can do, since going right here and doing it manually with the mouse really sucks, you can do it with the scroll of your mouse. So if you scroll up, it's going to go up. And if you scroll down, it's going to go down. I believe I just don't have to tell you that. But if you hold the shift and you just hold it, it's going to scroll it horizontally, right? That's actually really cool. What if, can we do the same thing we do right here with the zoom, right there with the scroll? Yes, we can. Well, what you need to do is to go to Control, hold it, and then scroll, and it's just going to adjust it for you, right? It's just, a lot more easy and quicker. So let's just begin with all the controls that we have right here. And remember, I am not going to cover the actions because this is a pretty long subject, and I'm not going to be covering this section right here. I'm going to create a different guide, a different video for this one. So by default, you have these tools right here. You have the arrow, the slice, the paint, and just a bunch of tools. So when you're standing on the arrow can do several things. You can just double click and remove notes, or you just can go, let me just go to a lower. You can go add notes by double clicking, and I'm pretty sure you knew all of that. Now, maybe what you didn't know is that when you double click, if you hold your second click and you keep holding, and if you move it horizontally, it's just going to make the note longer. Now, notice that when we do this, it's going to transform the icon not to an arrow, and it's the paint. So this is kind of the nature of the paint. So I'm going to kind of remove all of this. You can select all and remove them with delete. And I'm going to go to this tool. Now, this one is a little bit easier because sometimes double clicking sucks. So with this one, you just can go right here and out at the notes just with one click. And same thing, if you hover, you're just going to be deleting them. So you don't need to double click anymore. So right here in between, we have this slice. So in this case, I'm just going to be doing something like this, and I'm going to make this note a little bit longer. And I'm going to go to this one. With this one, we just can chop whatever we have right here. And notice that it's snapping, or it's just kind of not letting me chop into certain positions. Well, this is because this is on. We can talk about this in a minute. But in the case of this one, we can just go right here and chop the notes in several positions. And again, I'm pretty sure you already knew all of this. Now still, I'm going to show you something cool. I'm going to go back to the arrow, and I'm just going to delete this, select everything, and I'm going to delete them. Now I'm going to add a note right here. Now when you add a note, the arrow has different functions. So if you go at the very end, you can extend the note by, just dragging. Same thing at the beginning. If you go right here, you can make it longer, but from, starting of the note. Now, this also applies if you have several notes. If you have something like this, what you can do is select all, or you can do Control and A, and it will select all the notes for you. And if you just drag them all, it's just gonna modify them all the notes. So maybe you noticed that when we resize, it's by default kind of a snapping, forcing the snapping to the grid that we have at the back. And I'm talking about the grid right here. And this is kind of a big topic. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But what you can do, if you don't want this snap, well, you can go right here. You can do the letter N, and it's going to just turn it off. And when you kind of move them, you can just move them freely. Now still, if this one is enabled, because sometimes you just want it on all the time, you can drag this, still it's gonna snap, but if you hold shift, is going to let you move it freely. Now, to do this, you need to, again, click. And once you're holding, then you do shift. And you kind of make it bigger or you make it smaller. Also, in arrow mode, since you might have, many notes or just different notes, what you can do, you just can cherry pick the different notes to alter them. Now, in this case, what you will need to do is to hold shift. And this is a pretty common action that you get on a lot of DAWs. Cherry pick whatever you want to do and then just alter the notes the way you want to. Now, let me just delete everything. Gonna kaboom, delete everything. And I'm gonna keep talking about the arrow because the arrow has a few more functions that are really, really useful. I'm gonna be adding a note and I'm gonna just make it longer in this case. So if I go right here and go at the bottom, right here at the bottom of the clip or the note event in this case, notice that the icon is changing. So now it's giving us the slice tool. So we don't need to go to the slice. We just can go at the bottom of the note and do the slicing. So if I go at the top, the icon is a little bit different. This one will modify velocity. Now, notice that you have this note right here, and then at some point it looks empty. Well, this is telling you, and you can see it right there, the velocity of the note. And by default, it's always 80%. And this is because we have a default velocity right here. So this is going to show you where the velocity is. And right there, you have a 20% that's, not there. So if you go right there at the top and you click and you drag, you just can go all the way 100% in velocity, or you just can adjust the velocity this way. And you don't have to go right here at the bottom and do it manually, right? You just can go at the top and modify your velocity very easily. Now, also, if I go at the top, we get, of course, the velocity. If I do Alt, and I'm just, tapping the Alt, notice that the icon is changing. So this one is going to mute the note. Now you can go right there and do the same thing and it's going to unmute it. Now, since at the top, we can do two things. What happens if I go at the bottom? Can we do two things by pressing the Alt? Yes, we can. It's a little bit weird. It's called a cut deep. Should be called deep cut, but I don't know. Is the name Studio One, selected for this. So if I go right there and maybe chop it right there, I'm going to do the Alt, I'm going to hold it, and I'm going to do the cut. Notice that something weird is going on right here. It's just, of course, slicing, just chopping the note, the note vent, but at the same time, it's chopping the MIDI clip. So now we have two separate MIDI events. So, there's a tiny difference between cutting or just doing a deep cut or a cut deep. So back to the single clip. Now, if I go right here, I'm going to chop it. And we already know how this works. Now, if these notes are next to each other and they're kind of a meeting at some point, you can go right here at the breakpoint, where they meet, and we have a different icon. This is the glue, and it's going to glue the notes. Now, let me just draw some notes right there. Maybe I'm going to do a C. I'm going to do another one, and maybe another one. So right here, you have some other options like the mute note, and this one will just mute it. So if we go to the arrow, we kind of already know we can do this by holding the Control or the Alt in this case and doing the mute. Yeah, we can do this. Now, the thing is that you need to go to the note, but for sure, and you need to hold the Alt and go to the upper part of the clip and do it. Now, this works well for one single MIDI clip or maybe a couple of note events. But what if you have a lot of notes and you want to mute a lot of notes? It sucks, right? So yeah, it sucks. That's why you get this option. So you can just easily go to the note event and just mute it and unmute it as well. Now, then you have the erase tool, and you can guess, you can guess what this one will do. It will just go and erase notes. And again, if you're wondering, why do we care? We can do it with this. Well, this one is a double click. And again, if you have a lot of notes, it sucks. But if you have, a lot of notes and you want to delete them, you can go right there and just kaboom, delete them all. And the last one in list, it's going to be this one. It's going to be the listen tool. This is something very useful that we get for the whole arrangement. Now, in this case, it's just a little bit different. I'm going to go to this one and just draw some notes. So we know that we have this loop, it's a very tiny loop. We might have a very long MIDI clip. So if you go to this one will start auditioning from this note. If you, of course, position yourself right here, it's going to be this note. And as long as you are holding your left click, it's just going to play and keep playing. Now, when you release it, it's going to go back to where your cursor is. Same thing right here. If I go and start right here, I release it and it goes back to this position, you know, where the cursor is. And notice that when we do this, and this is the same thing for the main arranger. If I do this, this channel, and let me just make it a little bit bigger, goes in solo mode. So if you have a lot of things playing right here, they will not play. This channel will be soloed when you use the listen tool. This might not look, very useful on this tiny clip, but when you have a long clip and you just want to audition one single part, is one of, a very useful thing. One more thing that you need to notice, this one has a lot of options right here, and this got to do with the modulations that we can draw right here at the bottom. We can use the freehand to draw a modulation, and in this case, again, it's freehand. But the other ones will give you a different vibe. And I'm not going to be talking about modulations a lot, maybe just velocity. All this could be covered in a different video because it's a pretty long topic. But if you go to your paint and you use a line, for example, you can just draw a line very easily. You don't need to do it manually. Same thing with the other ones. The parabola, it's just going to be like that. Just going to, just like that. And the square is going to be a square. You guessed it. And then you get a triangle, you get a saw, you get a sine wave. And let me just do a saw right here so I can show you. It's a pretty simple thing. We're going to get a saw. And the transform, it's something that we can select right here and just shift whatever we draw right here and just kind of create good, crazy modulations. So I created a tiny guide talking about all the options we have right here at the top. And this is something that you also get on your main arrange to do automation. So this is pretty much the same thing. Now, before we go to the snap, the Timebase, and the Quantize, just like the options you have right here at the top, when you're, let me just close this. When you're on this view and you're right here, you can do the number 1. It's going to be this one, the number 2, number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you can select all your different tools. So when you are right here and this portion is selected, it is the same thing. You can still go to 1, 2, it's going to be the slice, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And all the way to 1 is going to be the arrow. So now you don't need to go and just click it. You just can, press a number and you're going to be there. All right, so I'm going to go and delete everything and let's start talking about all the options that you have right here. Now, remember that when you add nodes, by default, it is snapping to the grid. So I can never just go wrong. It's just going to, always snap it to the grid. Now, what if I don't want this? I can go right there, disable this, and I can add nodes wherever the F I want. It doesn't matter if I'm playing in the right spot. I'm just gonna go and add it, right? Now you can toggle this on with the letter N. Just gonna toggle in, toggle on and off. Okay, let me just go back, and we need to talk about this section right here. Now the quantize for us is really, really important. Now, when we add a node, this one will decide what we are doing right here. So if I add a node and we have 1/16, now this is not 1/16, it's doing something else. Well, it's because right here in the left side on the inspector, this one, the letter Q, is disabled. Since the Q is disabled, it's just listening to whatever we do right here. So when I enable the Q, it's going to kind of say, okay, so I'm not going to be listening to this. I'm going to listen to whatever we have right here. So now if I do it again, it's going to be adding 16 notes. So now this one is the top dog right now. This one will decide what we add right here. So when we add a note, of course, it's going to be perfectly right in the grid. Now we can offset of list. Now we can change all of this. I can go to 1/8 if I want, and this one will change the grid. If I do 1/16, notice that the grid is different. So 1/8 is going to be adding 8 notes, pretty simple, and it matches the grid. Same thing when we do 1/4, same thing, I'm going to go right there and it will match the grid. So the quantize for us, it's really, really important, but it also works with this, and it also works with the Timebase and the snap. So when you go to the quantize, you have the most common options, but you have a lot of other options that will kind of shift whatever you're doing right here. So right now, if I do 1/64, that is going to be 1/64. But if I go to dotted, now the grid is going to be a little bit different. So when you draw notes right here, it's going to be with this quantization. So it's going to, it's going to sound a little bit different. Depends on what you do. And you can go crazy and go to other things. And again, all of this is just going to help you to shift whatever it is that you're doing and maybe get something, a little bit kind of more original. I'm going to go to 1/16 for now, which is the normal, most normal one. That's the quantize. Whatever we do right here, this one will follow and it will do it. Pretty simple. Now, the next thing on the list is going to be the Timebase. Now, the Timebase, it's a little bit weird, and I'm going to show you. Right now, we are working with bars, and it makes sense. We work with bars most of the times. So when you go right there, it's going to tell you, dude, I'm working with bars. How many bars? Well, whatever the quantize is doing. So now the Timebase is going to be based on the quantize. That's why when I change the quantize, the grid and everything else, behind is changing, because the Timebase is just following that. But we can offset this. Now, if I do seconds, now this one is going to look a little bit different. And notice that the timeline right here at the top is in seconds. Right? It's not in bars anymore. It's in seconds. So this is just going to change everything, or the grid, a little bit, just a little bit. Now, you have other options, and depends on what you're just doing. You have samples, which is something completely different. You have frames if you work with video. And again, we can go back to bars and say, dude, do whatever the quantize is doing. Now, still, you can say, okay, I don't want to listen to the quantize. I'm going to do 1/16 or maybe 1/32s, and this is going to show that. Now, still, with the quantize, we are still doing 1/16. So this one will not follow the Timebase. So they are just a little bit different right now. So we are still doing 1/16 when we enter a value, but the grid is showing something else. Again, all of this is just depends on what you want to do. The most common thing is for you to follow whatever it is that you do on the quantize, but you can change it. So I'm going to go to defaults, these bars, then quantize, and then 1/16 on the quantize. So then you have your snap, and remember that the snap, what it will do, it will snap it to the beginning of each grid. That's what the snap will do. It will not decide the length. It will just snap it right there, right? So, okay, so that's what the snap will do. But you have different options to do this, right? You have adaptive, you have a bar, you have quantize, and you have frames. So quantize, pretty much, it means whatever the quantize, just like the Timebase, whatever the quantize is deciding, we should do, I'm going to do just that. So when we enter a node, it's just going to snap it to the grid on whatever we have with the quantize. Now, the adaptive is a different thing. I'm going to go and delete it. Now, the adaptive, it means that the snapping will adapt to whatever grid you are watching right here. So right now, if I do this, it actually knows that we have 1/16, and it's just going to go and do that. Pretty simple. Now, if I go and just make it a little bit smaller, notice that the grid starts to change. Now we don't see the 16s because we don't have kind of enough space. So if I keep going smaller, we have the same issue. So the snapping is just adapted to whatever we can see on the screen. Now, if I try to add it to the second one, notice it's just not happening. It's just doing and snapping it to the beginning of this one. Same with this, and same with this. And if I go right there and try to add a node, it will not let me, because now the snapping is adapting to whatever we see. So if I make it, a little bit bigger, now I can, just do this. So right here is completely up to you which one you want to use. If you want to use the quantize and follow this, or you want to use the adaptive. Now, I believe the adaptive is a little bit more versatile, let's say, is a little bit more versatile. Now, you have other options like frames, and remember that this one, it's just frames, a little bit different. If you work with video, this one is going to be useful for you, but it's just a little bit weird if you're not working with video. Now, then you have var, and var, what it will do, will just, snap it to the beginning of the bar, and it's just going to work with bars. So if I do this, it's going to be adding right here. If I do right here, I'm going to stand right here in this position. It's not adding it. It's just adding it at the beginning of the bar. Now, we don't have two bars. If I go right there, it's doing it on the beginning of this bar, which is the bar number 2, right? So again, you have different options. For now, I'm just going to go to the adaptive because it's the most versatile. All right, so let's just keep moving on. Right here, you have the auto scroll, and I want to just kind of get this out of the way. And you can enable or disable this by doing F and, just toggle on and toggle off. Now, why do we get this? Now, I need to give you the right example. Let's say that we have something that is a little bit bigger, and we have a lot of notes. So I'm going to be doing something like this, and maybe I'm going to go to the paint, and I'm going to be just doing whatever. So we have something kind of a big. So if I play it, we can see right here where it's going, where it is, and we can see it. But sometimes you're going to be positioned on this place. You're going to be watching these notes and you don't see the rest of the timeline. So when you do play, this is going to go right there. And when it reaches this point, it's going to keep playing right here at the top, but you're not going to be able to see it. So the auto scroll is going to do the scrolling for you. Now, if I enable this and I do play, it will just kind of auto scroll it for us, right? So that's the whole point. Pretty simple, and this is very useful when you do automation or you're just editing notes. So right now, I don't care about this. I'm just going to delete all of this because we just don't need it. And I'm going to go back to whatever we had before. All right, so we have one bar, pretty simple. I want to talk about a different thing, which is duplicating, selecting, moving notes, and doing all the tasks, all the things that we do the whole time, because you have several ways to do this. So I'm going to be adding a note right here. And what you can do, you can just control and copy, and it's going to be copying that note. Now, of course, what you want to do, you want to paste it. Now, if you paste it, nothing is going to happen. And the pasting is going to happen with the control and the letter V. Now, the thing is that when you copy something, you need to select or position your cursor on a different place. And then if you do Control V, it's going to paste it. At the same time, I can go back and I'm going to do Control and then X, and it's going to chop this note. And if my cursor is right there, Control V, and it's going to just paste it right there. Now, you can do all of this by doing right click if you want, and you can see that you have the controls right there. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to position myself right there. And if I do the letter D, it's going to duplicate this note, right? Pretty simple. We do D, 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 D all over the place, and it's just going to go and duplicate the note. Now, what you can do, you can select multiple notes if you wish, something like that. You can go right there, select multiple notes, and you can do the letter D, and it's going to duplicate it for you. Now, sometimes you just don't want this. You just don't want to duplicate it to the next thing that it's on the grid. You want to duplicate it and put it someplace else. So what you can do when you select everything, you can click, then hold, and when you're dragging, after you're dragging and you see that it's kind of a duplicating the notes, you go wherever you want to place them, and you need to do Alt. And when you do Alt and you release it, is going to kind of move them by mistake. When you do Alt and then you release the mouse, you release the left click, it's just going to do it for you. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to select everything. I'm going to be moving. I want to put it right here. I'm going to do Alt. Notice that right there, we see the icon of plus. Well, that is duplicating the note. And just like on pretty much any software, you can undo or you can redo. And you have the options right here at the top. It says right there, undo is going to be Control Z or Z or whatever you want to, wherever your English is from. And then the redo is going to be Control Y. And this is something very common with all software. All right, so let me just delete this. I'm going to be adding some notes wherever. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to be going there, just adding a note right there. It doesn't matter. So we can do several things with the arrow keys. I'm going to place myself right here with the cursor. Now I'm going to be moving. I'm going to be touching my arrow keys, and I'm doing the left and I'm doing the right. So when I do left, is going to position myself on the first note. But if I do the right, it's going to move on to the next one, and to the next one, and to the next one, and to the next one. Which is, something pretty simple. You can select different notes with your arrows. Now, if I do Shift and hold that Shift, instead of just moving on to the next one, is going to start on this one and select the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And I'm doing the right arrow. Now, if I do left, it's going to deselect and go the other way. So in this case, if I'm standing right here and I do Shift and then left, it's going to select all these notes. So this is equal to do something like this and just selecting multiple notes at the same time, but you're doing it with your arrow keys. Right, so I'm going to go right there. And one thing that we can do that maybe you didn't know, you can go up in octaves or you can go down in octaves. Now I'm going to be selecting this 2 notes right here. It doesn't matter. So if I do shift and hold that shift, I'm going to press the arrow, the up arrow, and it's going to shift this or move it 1 octave up. And if I do down, it's going to be going down by an octave. And this is something, you know, pretty common on all the DAWs. Now, if I release the shift and I'm not holding anything, and I go up on the arrows, it's just going to move the notes by semitone. Just going by semitone, shift, octave, and no shift, it's by 1 semitone. Pretty understandable. Now I'm going to go right here on the scale and I'm going to disable this. We are going to be talking about this. Maybe you were wondering, what is this? Well, that's the scale. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Now notice that we can select this and we can go up and we can go down and by an octave or, you know, down an octave. What if I want to move sidewise? I don't want to go up. I want to go to maybe one, you know, I want to move right here and do something like this or do something like this. Now I want to do it with the arrow keys. So by selecting this note, I'm going to do Alt and I'm going to hold it. I'm going to do Alt and I'm holding the Alt key. Now, if I go up, it's just going to nudge up and nudge down. Just, you know, we were able to do this without holding anything. But now we can go to the sides. The control can go up, holding the control, of course, can go up and can go to the next one or to the previous one. Now, you can, of course, do this with multiple notes. Again, you can select everything, go up an octave, down an octave, and if you do the Alt, it's going to go to the next one or to the previous ones. Notice that when we do this, it's moving, but it's just snapping to the grid. And that's fine because we are using snapping to grid. Now, if you disable the snap to grid, instead of snapping to the next position, it's going in tiny measures. I believe it's sticks. That's the right name. So you can offset maybe some notes if you want to. You can still enable this and go back to whatever you had to. And notice it's remembering the offset that you did. So you can still, you know, kind of drag this and snap it to the grid back again. So if I disable the snap and do the same thing, I'm going to do the Alt and I'm going to move them. You can offset some notes and humanize your different note events. So notice all the things that we covered so far, and we still have a lot more to go. So we need to talk about the input quantize and the auto quantize, and what is the difference? So right here, this one is the auto quantize, and right here you have the input quantize. Now this is very useful, especially when you're recording live. So if I go right here at the beginning and I do rec and I start recording something, it will just snap them to the grid. Why? Well, because this input quantize is enabled. I'm going to do some recording. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to do some random notes just like that. It doesn't matter, but we can see that all the notes are right there in the pocket, right there in, you know, snapped to the grid. And that's fine. But sometimes you just don't want this. You want to maybe have something a little bit more natural. You need to go to input quantize and just disable this. And if I kind of do the same thing, it sucks because I just, you know, I'm just typing or pressing the pads like a cat, but they're not on the grid. And this is the IQ, the input quantize. And I'm just telling you this, maybe this doesn't belong to this part, but I'm just telling you this because maybe you're thinking that this is the one and this is not the one. Now, if I go right here, it's going to say automatically quantize selected notes. And this is what it is pretty much. You have several ways of quantizing notes. For example, if I go to this one and instead of doing adaptive, I'm going to go to quantize. If I go right here and select the quantize, it's just going to adjust this for me. Now, still, you have a few ways to do this. Now, if you don't have this enabled, it doesn't matter right now. If I select this 3 notes, I'm going to press the letter Q, and it's just going to quantize the notes for me, even though they are a little bit offset. Now, I can do this with pretty much everything. I can do Control A and select all the notes and do the letter Q, and it's just going to quantize everything that we did. So if we are shitty players like me, I can play guitar like a king, but on the keys, I suck, you know, to be honest. So, yeah, we can quantize the notes just by pressing the letter Q. Now let's move on to the next thing, which is going to be this option, and it's select part automation with notes. Pretty funny name, and it's actually pretty cool. So I'm going to be not enabling this, and I'm on the modulation tab, so it means I can write some modulation. So if I select the paint tool, I can just, you know, draw whatever modulation. It doesn't matter. Just going to do something, whatever. It doesn't matter, right? Okay, so that's fine. So now what happens if I move this notes? I'm going to make this a little bit, you know, wider. And I want to move this notes. I want to move this ones. And this ones, they have this automation. We can see that they have this automation. This automation belongs to this, but not really. This automation belongs to the timeline. If I move the notes like so, the modulation that we did for this notes, it's not going to move. Right? Makes sense because this is tied to the timeline, not to the notes. So maybe you can guess what this does. So that's why it says select part automation with notes. So whenever I enable this, if I move the notes, the automation, I made a mistake right there. And you can see if I select this and move the notes, whatever we did with the automation is going to follow the notes. That's why it's a very important thing that, you know, now we have available on this version of Studio One. Before you just had to move everything manually and it sucked. Right now, you just run your automation, you enable that option, and the automation is going to follow, right? I'm going to disable this and we are ready. And for now, I'm just going to delete this. We are ready to move on to the inspector and talk about some options, some cool things that we get right here. Now, remember, I'm not going to be covering all of this. I'm going to do a separate video about this because this guide, it's already long enough. So, okay, so I'm going to go there. Now, the first option is that you have the color of your instrument. If you want to change it into something a little bit more cheerful, you can. Now, you can select different instruments. If we had a different clip with a different instrument, you can toggle this from here. And I'm just going to add a second instance of this one, and it's going to be by default the color that I don't want. I want something different, the color blue. All right, so we have two instruments, and this one has a different MIDI clip, whatever. I'm going to be going to the pink one. We are working on this one. So if you have something right here, whatever, it doesn't matter. You can still go right here and select the other instance and it's take you to the other MIDI clip. So you don't need to double click to switch. You just can go easily go here and just switch different instances. Same thing if you have right here. This is a different thing. You can view different clips on the same one. If you enable this and I go and do something like that, and I go back to that one. If I enable this, I can see the information or the MIDI, the note events on the other clip. So by just going to this, I can edit this one, but I also can view the other ones. So I'm going to be creating a different guide about this. I don't want to extend this because this is already long enough. I want to talk about this. And for now, I'm just going to go here and remove the track and the instrument. I'm gonna leave the pink one. I kind of like it. So, okay, so let's talk about the options we have right here. So by default, you can solo the instrument, right? Pretty simple, you know, self-explanatory. Then you can audition the notes or not. Right now, when we do this, we are auditioning the notes. If I do something like that, we still hear this. But now if I punch the notes, if I add notes, we are not hearing them. That's the whole point, right? Pretty simple option. We had this option since version forever. I'm going to delete this and move on to the next thing. If I add notes, just like this, right? We can see the velocity and we already know this. So let me just change the quantize to 1/8. I'm going to go and do it like that and just adjust this to so something we can see something, you know, bigger. So whenever we add notes, by default, the default velocity is going to be 80%. We know this because it says 80%, and we can see that there is a missing 20%. So by default, it's 20, right? We know this, but we can change this and make this 100%. So now every note we add is going to be 100%. Pretty easy to understand, right? All right, so I'm going to go back and move on to the next topic. Now, before I go to the scale, which is something really cool, I'm going to go to length. So if this one is enabled, it means that whatever we do right here in terms of quantization is going to be decided by the options we have right here. Now, if I delete this and let me just do something different, let me do 1/16, right? We can see that it's just that, right? So if I disable this, now whatever we do right here is not listening to this quantization. It's going to do whatever we do right here. So for example, if I go and do something like that, we can do straight triplets, quintuplets, or septuplets, doesn't matter. I'm going to do it. It's just going to go and do that. So it's not going to listen to this quantize anymore. It's just going to do whatever it wants, right? So that's what it means. You can do dotted if you wanted to. It's just completely up to you. Then you have something called sound variation. Again, it's something that I'm maybe going to cover on a different guide because, again, this guide is long enough. Now, we need to talk about the scales. Now, scales is something really, really useful that maybe you're just going to be using the whole time. Let me just make this a little bit wider. So when you enable the scale, you can see it right there that it's telling you, okay, so whatever scale that you do right here is going to show you where that scale is. So you can choose your root and you can choose the scale. So if you go to chromatic, of course, chromatic is just every single note. So we have, the light blue on every single note. But we can go to different ones. Let's do natural minor. So C natural minor, we have a good old C minor. And we can see what's going on right here. So we can easily just draw some notes and we know that they will follow the scale. So if I add a note event, this will kind of snap, let's say, to whatever scale we are using. If we disable this, we can add notes wherever we want. But when we have the scale enabled, we can only add notes where the scale is. So I can do there. Let's say I want to do it right here. It's not even letting me play it. So if I want to add a note right there, it's just not going to happen, right? It's just not doing it. It's just adding a note to this one. So you need to make sure that if you want to add notes to different places, you need to do something else if you have a scale enabled. So still, this is a good feature. The scale that not all DAWs have. Some DAWs don't have this. And, it's kind of sucks. So the fact that we have the ability to do this, it's really cool. So still, we have one single problem. Let's say I'm going to be adding a note there and a note there and a note there. So I want to add a note right here on this one. Now, we cannot do it because the scale is not letting us. So you will need to disable the scale, go right there, add the note, enable the scale. Right? So there's a different way of doing this. So what you can do, you can go right there and with your arrow keys, you can move it down. So you're pretty much selecting the nearest note and then moving it down. And now this note doesn't belong to the scale, but still it's letting you, put the note right there. So we have another thing. Let's say that I'm going to be disabling this and I'm going to be just punching in notes randomly. And then again, I'm going to do it randomly. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. I'm just doing it randomly. Okay. So we have something, right? So what we can do in terms of scale, we are always talking about the scale. If I enable the scale, nothing is going to happen. It's just not going to change or adjust the notes to whatever scale we are doing. Well, if we have a scale selected, we can do right click and we have an option that it will just adjust the notes that we have to the nearest position that belongs in the scale. So if I go to musical functions, you have a lot of options right there. We're going to talk about this in a different video because this is again too long. You have apply scale. If I do this, it's going to shift all the notes, whatever notes, to match the scale. And again, it's just moving the notes to the nearest position that it's fits the scale. So that's the scale. And again, it's a very useful feature. Now, for now, I'm going to be disabling this and I'm going to be moving on to the next thing, which is going to be right here, this option we have right here. Oh, one thing I didn't show you that it's super cool. Let me do something like that and something like that. If I select a note right here, notice at the bottom, it says the selected chord, it's C. How weird is it G? So, well, C, E, G is going to be C major. When we select this note, it's giving us some options right here, right? So it's telling me the pitch that we can adjust. We're going to talk about this in a minute. But right there at the bottom, it's telling me that this note belongs to a C chord because it's analyzing whatever we have on this position, and it sees other two notes, and the whole is going to be a C major. So if I go right here, it's telling me, dude, you have a C major right there. If I move this one, let me just move it, it's going to be a different note, and it's just going to tell me whatever is that we are doing when we draw notes, which is something, again, really, really useful, just like the scales. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to go right here at the bottom. So when we add a note, we have some options right here. When we deselect a note, we don't have it. It says no event selected. So when we select an event, we can offset the start, the end, we can adjust the length, but instead of doing it with the mouse, we're going to be doing it with these controls. You know, pretty simple stuff. I'm going to be putting it right here. So if I go right there and you hold shift or you just drag this, you can easily move it around with these values. So this one will adjust the start and this one will adjust the end, right? Pretty simple. Now the other one is going to be adjusting the length. This depends on what you want to do. It's going to go a little bit more aggressively if you go to the first numbers. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, of course, you can't do this with the mouse, just completely up to you, but you have the option to do this. Now, then you have the pitch, and the pitch is just, you know, the pitch. C3 is going to be C3, but you can go right there and just change it to something else. It doesn't matter, right? And this is maybe something useful if you don't want to do it with your mouse. Now, you can type the note right here. Maybe, let's say it's going to be a C3. It's going to shift it to a C3. And then you have your velocity. You just can go down in velocity and up in velocity manually on each note bend. That's why this section, it's by default for the event selected. Now, can you do it with multiple notes? Well, let's test it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to select this, and it's going to be telling me. Now, it depends on what you're doing right here. This is just not going to work. It's just selecting this one. But if I shift this, it's going to shift them all, right? So what's going to happen with the velocity is going to adjust the velocity for all, right? And this is actually something very useful because going right here at the bottom and doing it manually, it sucks sometimes. And to finish with this section, you can't mute it. Just mute the note. Pretty useful and simple. Okay, so I'm going to unmute it and I'm going to delete all of this. So by default, whenever you add a note, the color is going to be the color of whatever it is that you're doing right here. Now, for now, I'm going to go right there and just go down in velocity so we can see there's something right there. So the color is going to be the instrument color. So it's going to be pink. I guess it's pink, right? But you could do something else. Instead of using the part color, you could do the pitch color. Now, what this does, pretty much, is going to add different colors for different pitches. In this case, it's C3. If I go to a C4, it's going to be the same red. So now you know that every time that you see a C note, it's going to be the red one. So it's just pretty much assigning a color to each individual different note. Now, when you memorize the colors, you instantly know what note that is. That's why you get this note color to pitch. Now, what you can do is velocity. Now, velocity is just a different thing. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and that. So now, because we have default velocity to 100%, the color is red. That's it. So if I select this and I go down in velocity, now the color is going to be changing. And we can do it from here, maybe. I'm going to be going right there and just changing the velocity. So as you get to closer to almost no velocity, you can have a cold color. And if you go up, it's going to be a red color in this case, just a warmer color. So yeah, that's the difference between the velocity, pitch, and part. Now then at the bottom, you have the velocity var, and you can guess what this is. If I disable this, we have no more information about the velocity on each note event. That's pretty much it. If I enable, we can see it. Now, if I go right here to note controller, we don't see it. And it's because you can use the note controller or you can use the velocity var. Now, the note controller is something that we've been using forever on different DAWs as well. Now, if I go right there and go all the way up in velocity, this one has a solid color. If I go down, because we are changing colors, let me just go to part. So if I go right there and I go down in velocity, it's just going to be an empty square. If I go up in velocity, all right, so let me just grab it right there. If I go up in velocity, it's just we are gonna fill the square. Pretty simple. This is how we've been using this forever. I much prefer the velocity bar because as soon as I see this, I know the velocity just much more, just much useful. Now, sometimes this not filled area, it's a little bit weird. So what you could do when you go to black selection, and notice that this is something that it's enabled with velocity bar or note controller. In this case, if I go right there. So what this does when you select the note, it's just going to change it to black. That's all, and it's going to be useful if you think about this, because if you have a lot of notes and sometimes when you select the notes, just going to be a little bit weird. So when you select the notes, if you don't like the black selection and you don't like the white selection, because this is kind of the white selection, you can change it to black. It's just a little bit more visual, I would say. In my case, a little bit better, but it's completely up to you. I'm going to disable this and go back to the default, which is this one. All right, so one more thing before we call it a day. Right now, we are working on the piano view. You have other views. You have the score view, which is this one. And of course, you can add notes and do whatever you want. And then you have the drum view. Now, this one, it's a little bit more useful when you work with drums. So if you bring an Impact XT, this is going to be very useful for you. Now, still the pattern is just a little bit better, in my opinion. Let me just bring the Impact. This is the drum the drum machine from Studio One. So whenever I bring this and you are on the drum view, you're going to be able to work with something. Now, let me just go back to Impact and add a clip, right? I'm going to go to Impact and I'm going to select the kit. So as soon as you do so, this is going to tell you the names right there. Let me just scroll. The names of the different pads that you have on the drum kit, and you can easily audition whatever you have, and then you can create whatever pattern you want for your drums. It's just an easier way of working with with drums or different instruments like a drum machine. Now you can still, if you don't like this, go back to the piano and you're still going to have your notes right there. So you have this way of working or the other way of working. And another way of working is by selecting this, right-clicking, and you're going to be changing this or converting this to a pattern. And this is a completely different thing. I've already made a guide about this. So check the channel. Maybe you're going to be fine. You're going to find it right there. And we cover pretty much everything we can do with the pattern type of view. Now, we still need to cover a lot of ground, and I'm going to do it on different videos, talking about all of this and all the other things we didn't cover. But for this one, we can call it a day. So hopefully you learned something on this one. And remember to like and subscribe, of course. And if you have the money and you want to buy me a coffee to say thanks, you can. Just go to the links at the description. And you have PayPal, you have YouTube Thanks Now, and you have a Patreon. If you want, you can be a 1-month patron and just buy me a coffee. Why not? All right, so that's it. So see you on the next one.